Me when you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready anytime you are.
I'm Marjorie Martin, and I'm 92, will be 93 in another 2 months. And during World War II, I lived in Brockport, New York, next door to a canning factory, where in my just a fence between us and the canning factory, my pasture at the canning factory. And they brought the prisoners of war from Hamlin, where there was a prisoner of war camp, and brought them up on buses every day to work in the canning factory. And every time one of the prisoners wasn't right there when the guard thought they ought to be, they'd come over to my house to see if I had seen them. And I began to think they thought I was harboring or something. But of course, no prisoner of war in his right mind would have come to my house because I had 4 little children and was right next door, which would have been the obvious place to look first for them. And I felt sorry for them because I knew that a lot of them had been in the Army not expecting to wind up as prisoners of war away from their family and all that in our country. And I felt sorry for them, but I wasn't I would have not let them stay in my house. And it was a rough time for our country anyway then, and for people who were whether you were had a husband in the Army or a daughter or whatever. I didn't. I had a brother in the Pacific, which my mother worried about all the time. And I, afterward, after the war, General Electric built a plant, a factory there where the canning factory had been. And I'm glad to know that they're going to try to rebuild some of the prisoner of war camp in Hamlin, or make it so that people will know that it was there during our time of need. Okay.
Yeah. Why don't you talk about your granddaddy in the war?
Oh well, that was I'm a granddaughter of the Confederacy, as they called it. My grandfather, my father's father, was a lieutenant in the 6th Mississippi Confederate Army and lost his arm in the Battle of Port Gibson when General Grant took his troops down past Natchez, past Vicksburg, I mean, and tried to land them in where he thought the Confederates weren't defending at Port Gibson. And there was a real big battle there. And my grandfather's left arm was shot and mangled between the elbow and the shoulder and had to be cut off by the Confederate surgeon without any anesthetic, I might add.
What was his name, Grandma?
His name was William Gwynn Steen, and his troops called him Captain Bill. I have, when I was small, I went to church every Sunday in Crystal Springs, Mississippi, and right down the road from the church was Mr. Billy Cook lived, with a white beard and everything. I thought he looked like Santa Claus. And my father would stop there and talk to him because he was my grandfather's bugle boy, drummer and bugle boy in the regiment. And I remember him saying that there was nobody like Captain Billy. And of course, after my grandfather was wounded, he was sent home. Wasn't in the army anymore. He married and had 10 children. My father and my father's brother and 8 daughters.
Wow.
And I never met my grandfather. He died 9 years before I was born. And but I heard a lot about him from his 2 or 3 of the soldiers that had served under him, and of course my father and my aunts. Evidently, he managed very well with one arm. He served as the county clerk for Rankin County for a long time, and was able to saddle a horse, put a bridle on a horse, make his bed, and a lot of things that he could do with his right arm, and get along. He did marry again after his wife died, about 10 years after that, and she survived him. This lady survived him as his widow. But of course, as I said, I never met him.
What else do you know about the Civil War and when you were younger and what it did to people?
I grew up, when I got bigger, my mother and father moved from Copiah County to Vicksburg in order to be near my mother's grandparents. And my grandmother was in very bad health. And my mother wanted to take care of her and see that she got care and all, and they lived with us, my grandfather and grandmother. And my mother and grandfather and my father had bought a place that was 1,100 acres, and it was a cotton farm, mostly on the Yazoo River, just north of Vicksburg. And if the river flooded, the land flooded, but most of it. But across the highway was where we lived, and it was a house on a real high hill. And the hill was a fort during the Civil War. It was up there to bombard the Yankee. General Sherman put it there, and it was used to bombard the Confederate boats on the Yazoo River. And my sister and I could go up there and did to pick blackberries, and then we found a lot of mini balls, and we found buttons off of Union soldiers' uniforms and all. We had quite a little collection at one time, and I think my sister still has it. I didn't save what I found. I gave it to people. And it was a lady that lived neighbors to us said her grandmother had lived there during the Civil War and was so mad because the Yankee soldiers stole her chickens and eggs from her, and she just hated General Sherman. Of course, he thought he was doing his duty, I'm sure, but it was very hard on Southern families. And then, of course, I went to lots of times, went out in the National Park at Vicksburg, that is a Civil War park, memory and monuments and all to the Confederate soldiers and the Union soldiers. There's a big cemetery there, separate from the park, really, for the Union soldiers that died at Vicksburg. Vicksburg is a memorial town, really.
And you consider Vicksburg your home?
Vicksburg I consider my home. I was raised there and lived there until I married, and went home after I married, went home every summer on my vacation and the children's vacation to my mother, to visit my mother, who was living in Vicksburg on Washington Street.
And how did you meet your husband?
I met my husband when he was in the CC camps that the President Roosevelt created during the Deep Depression that we had in 1929 and 30. And they worked out in the national park, cleaning up the park and helping set monuments and cutting down trees that shouldn't have been there and things like that. They had these boys called the CC camp boys, and my husband to-be came from Rochester, New York, with a bunch of Yankee boys there. And I met him at the YMCA when my teacher, I was a senior in high school, she thought it would be nice if we met some of the CC boys and showed them that we were a city of hospitality, because the boys had complained to her that any girls they met on the street and all turned up their nose at them and wouldn't speak to them, and that the girls were unfriendly and all that. And she said, I want you to show hospitality to these boys that are away from home and all. So I went to this party at the Y and met my future husband that night. And we married, and I went to live in Rochester, New York with him when he was finished with his time in the CC.
Why would he come from Rochester, New York and go to Mississippi with the CCC?
Why would he?
Yeah, why didn't the New York people stay in New York and the Mississippi boys stay in Mississippi?
President Roosevelt had made it very plain on his talks when he established the CC that he wanted boys from one place to go to another place in the United States. In other words, New York boys to go south, South boys to come north or west, and the Southwest and the Northwest. And he wanted them to be moved, not to stay in their home spot, because he wanted these boys and young men to realize how the United States was had different things that were attractive, and that they lived different ways, and what it meant to be an American. That America wasn't all the same as New York or wherever they came from. and with different habits and different people, belief, and different crops and scenery, and he thought it was good for him to learn that. So that's why New York boys came to Mississippi, Mississippi boys went to Kansas, Kansas boys went to California, and it was just mixed up, and they learned a lot about their country, whether they had studied American history or not.
So he really wanted people to know that it wasn't Yankees versus the rebels anymore, the Southerners, and that as a United States of Americans, we were all united and we were all Americans and not different.
Yeah, that was his point, and I think it worked very well. A lot of boys from the CC made acquaintances in places they would have never gone,
right,
if they hadn't been sent there, And then, of course, the war came, and a lot of soldiers were sent different places, but soldiers weren't sent way off in groups like they did with the CC. And at first for training, but it helped us become Americans instead of Mississippians or New Yorkers. We realize our country comes first.
Tell me about some of your favorite things. Doesn't matter if it's places or things or food or anything. Just tell me some of your favorites.
One of my favorite things is the place at Gulfport, where I spent some childhood days, and after I was grown, I went down there a lot to the beach, and I had a great uncle that lived down there and had a beautiful home that was destroyed by a hurricane. But it was fun to go down there and go to the beach and go out to some of the little islands and catch crabs and fish. Go to the shrimp market, down to the fish market and get some fresh shrimp from the boat. And I never lived on the beach at the coast, but I was drive 100 miles to go down and rent a cottage and spend a week. And I like to travel. I used to like to travel. Of course, I came from New York to Mississippi, and we drove and brought our kids, and would stop overnight at a motel and go to Mammoth Cave and stop and see all kinds of things that were along the highways so the children would get an idea about what their country was about. And I like to travel. And
where have you been? What kind of places have you been to?
Well, I've been around Cape Horn in a ship. And
where is Cape Horn?
Huh?
Where is Cape Horn?
Oh, the very southernmost country of Argentina, the point of Argentina in South America. I went to Chile and Buenos Aires and all. I've been to Mexico 2 or 3 times as a nurse with a medical group from my church to go down and form a clinic in a little towns across from Texas into Mexico. And the people appreciate it so much because they don't have a doctor over there. They didn't at that time. They didn't have doctors. One place I went did have a hospital 3 miles away, and I visited that hospital and was horrified at what I saw. that they were doing the best they could do, but they didn't have adequate sheets, and the patients were in dirty beds, and it was just pitiful. And the other time I went with as a nurse for a dentist, and the people came to have fillings and their teeth, abscess teeth pulled and all that. They didn't have any dental health around there at all, and we stayed a week. The two dentists taking care of people's teeth, and that was in Mexico, where they were having an awful drought that year and having to buy water. Trucks came by with 5-gallon jugs of drinking water. And I've been to Canada and several times, and traveled all over the United States, of course. But I'm getting too old to travel anymore.
Even though you're here from Mississippi and New York for a 3-week vacation at 92.
Yeah.
You lived in Paddle, Mississippi for Hurricane Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
It was pretty awful. Katrina roared, and the sound was really terrifying. It blew house tops off and roofs and trees down, and we were without electric, water, gas, and no telephone for 19 days at our house in Hattiesburg. And I just got along the best way I could. We didn't have anywhere we could go for a while, and then after the third or fourth day, I did go to Jackson, to my sister's. Of course, Jackson wasn't affected by the hurricane, except for a few trees blown down. But a lot of the people around Hattiesburg and the coast and all they tried to get them into tents and things on the coast, and so many of the beautiful homes down there were completely blown away. And now, 5 years later, you go and you see the foundation of homes along the Route 90 down there that I remember as being beautiful homes. And now there's just a foundation that shows where they were. Some of them are being rebuilt, however, and I hope that more of them will be. And a hurricane like that is a terrible thing because it kills a lot of people, like Camille did a long time ago. That wiped out so many people and so many houses there. Nothing we can do about it, I don't think. They come when the hurricane gets ready.
You have 6 children. Tell me about them. Tell me about your kids.
I had an older son. Then I had 4 girls: Mary Lee, Kay, Evelyn, and Betty. And then I had another son, Greg. And as of now, I have 4 children. My oldest son died 2 years ago with a heart attack. And my third daughter died just a little while before he died, several months, with a blood vessel that burst in her brain and killed her. It was inoperable. And she died within 2 days, really, and left 3 daughters. Yeah.
How many grandchildren do you have?
I had 10 grandchildren.
And how many great-grandchildren?
16.
And how many great-great-grandchildren?
I have 2.
Tell me about them.
2 great-great-grandchildren. I have a little, Marjorie, my oldest daughter, has a great-grandson. That's my great-great-grandchild, and he will be 2 years old in November. And right around Thanksgiving time, he's a baby. Was